Following the royal crisis talks, the Queen will allow Prince Harry and his wife Meghan to split from the royal family. Joining me now is David Flint. David, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. What damage does this do to the monarchy?
I don't think it does any damage at all. The Queen has shown how quickly she resolved a problem. She didn't need a royal commission. She didn't need consultants. She didn't need an army of bureaucrats. She got everybody together and they came to a sensible conclusion. Now, this is not the big thing. It's not like the abdication which we're being told. It is something which is a readjustment. And it's in many ways desirable. For many, many years there's been the thought that perhaps more time should be spent by some members of the royal family in Commonwealth countries, in realms like Canada, and I think the Canadians will be delighted to be having two royals with them, and I'm sure, and it seems to be very obvious, that the two members of the royal family, both Harry and Meghan, are going to continue as volunteers. They're not being paid. They're continuing as volunteers on a number of great projects, the most prominent of which is the Invictus Games. There are the charities in Africa. There are all sorts of wonderful things they're doing. And some of the things that about this have been misrepresented. For example, there's a continuing story in almost every British newspaper by royal watchers that the renovations at Frogmore and indeed the whole royal family are being funded by the British taxpayer. Well, they're not. All of the funds are coming from the royal resources themselves, from the Crown estate, from which the British government takes an inordinate amount of effective tax. I think at the present time it's 75% reduced from 85%. The Queen gets the balance and she has to renovate all of the palaces, run everything. This is not money for them to use themselves. This is to run the functions of the office, to run the palaces and so on, which are really public places, and to do those wonderful charitable things that they're all indulged in. Royal princes are no longer playboys as they were in the 17th or 18th century with lots of mistresses. They seem to be so involved up to their necks in doing good works, particularly things like the Invictus Games.
Plenty of good work, but it has undoubtedly been a controversial year for the royals, with not only Prince Harry and Meghan having this, I guess, splitting from the royal family, but also we had Prince Andrew. Surely, do you think that some monarchists might be turning their backs on the royals? It certainly hasn't been a good PR year for them.
Well, what's been going on with Harry is really just a storm in a royal watcher's coronet. It's nothing more than that. It's a small thing. In relation to Prince Andrew, he really has had a very rough deal from the British Broadcasting Corporation because they subjected him, as they should, to a rigorous interview. But the person who is accusing him was treated very softly. She wasn't challenged about her claims, similar claims against the great American lawyer Alan Dershowitz, who was able to demonstrate to the satisfaction of a court and to his accusers' lawyers, he was able to demonstrate that the 6 or 7 occasions on which she alleged she had had some form of underage intercourse with him could not have been so because he kept such meticulous travel records. And he's also been able to show that it's highly doubtful that at the time she alleges that she was underage. Now, none of that was brought up by the BBC when they interviewed the alleged victim. So why was that? It seems to be very biased.
But regardless of the journalist's line of questioning, just the mere fact of this being in the headlines for so long in the year and the links to Epstein, surely it's not a good year for the royals in terms of monarchist loyalty.
Well, it's not a good year in relation to one member of the royal family, but there are a number of members of the royal family. The royal family is an interesting institution. There are a number of people in it, and people seem to be completely dazzled by the institution. For example, the very fact that the possibility of a war in the Middle East was being challenged in the news everywhere, not just in Britain and Australia and Canada, but in the United States too. That was being challenged by this very small matter of the rearrangement of the lives of Harry and Meghan, moving a bit to the United States but staying also in England. It seems that there is a fascination, as there has been for a very long time, an absolute fascination with the royal family, and of course, like any family, they have their ups and downs.
Yeah, well, I bet that they'll be hoping for a calmer 2020 after they've got these past few weeks out of the way. But do you think that this sets a dangerous precedent, this splitting of Harry and Meghan from the family, if a future Australian head of state could leave at any time?
Well, as you know, the position taken by ACM and, of course, the Australian government and Mr Turnbull, when it suited him, the position taken is that we have an Australian as head of state, which is an obscure term related to international law. We have an Australian as head of state, that's the Governor-General, and we have effectively a form of crowned republic, and the alternative seems to be, from the Republicans, all they can come up with a very tired, flawed and quite disreputable politicians' republic, and they've stuck with that for 25 years. The golden rule for changing your constitution should be, does it improve the governance of Australia? We have serious problems in the governance of Australia. We see this in the current terrible tragedies that are going on. We see this with water, we see this with the drought, we see this with the price of electricity. There is a serious problem with the governance of Australia. There's one institution in the constitutional system which works and works very well. That's the head of state. And why should we be changing that when we should be concentrating on how to improve those parts of the constitutional system which are run by mainly Republican politicians who seem to be quite disastrous in what they do?
Well, it'll be interesting to see if the other monarchists across the country have the same loyalty as you do after the year that was 2019 and also a rocky start to 2020. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, David.
Thank you, Charlotte.